Welcome to Talking Buffalo, featuring conversations with guests from around the world of sports, media, pop culture, and all things Buffalo. With your host, Patrick Moran.
All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you, as always, for checking us out. Make sure you follow us, please, on the audio side, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. Of course, YouTube on the video side. I'm joined right now by my weekly visit from my good friend, Anthony Marino. Dude, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Hey, man. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, too. We tape these Monday morning. I got to put that out there. I try to make sure I do that every week. So, by the time most people are hearing this, it's either really late on the video side Monday night, most people Tuesday morning at some point. So it's not really the weekend anymore. But I still kind of feel like the weekend vibes because we're taping this so early on Monday. I didn't mention this on the show yesterday with Joe, embarrassingly enough. And I know you're not a big lacrosse guy. I'm not either. But congratulations to the Buffalo Bandits, man. Just this city wants a champion so bad. Of course, obviously, the Bills or the Sabres are the two big ones. But the Bandits won another championship on Saturday night. And I was at a diaper party on Sunday with a couple friends of mine. And there were a few people still geared out in their Bandits gear from Saturday night, probably still partying from Saturday night. What a vibe. What a feeling. The electricity in downtown Buffalo Saturday night to watch a professional sports team win a championship. It's just awesome, man.
No, it's exciting to see. Obviously, I think everybody knows at this point, I'm based in Albany, right? So the Bandits beating the Firewolves, like still a relatively new franchise, right? So when you think of that, they're looking to build and aspiring to be what the Bandits are, not just in the way of like being champions. Of course, that's what every team aspires towards, but to having that type of a fan base and that type of a just kind of a, having the city wrap your arms around it. So hopefully this is something that, while be it they fell a little bit short, helps to build a little bit of a rivalry here. Like when you think about kind of just traveling up and down the thruway, I think it'd be a really good thing. But shout out to the Bandits and of course, congratulations to them.
I forgot about that. I forgot to beat Albany in the finals. Maybe Anthony Marino's not quite as happy as Patrick Moran here on this podcast about that. That's right, man. Yeah, good point. We're going to jump into just a few minutes. I got 5 guys that I feel like are being slept on a little bit when it comes to the Buffalo Bills. Now, these aren't, no-name players. These are relatively well-known players on the football team, but they're not the guys that you talk about much. And I think these guys could be aligned to play a big role in 2024. I want to get Anthony's thoughts, of course, on those. Again, so most people are actually watching or listening to this on Tuesday at some point, which means it is quarterback Josh Allen's birthday. 27 years old, Josh Allen's turning today. And the only thing I want to say before we get going here is I'm really trying to enjoy this era of football as much as I can. I want a championship, man. I'm starving for one. I'm getting old. We're getting up there. We've watched a lot of Bills football. We all want the same result. But I also want to make sure that I try to just enjoy this era. I do remember the 17, the year drought and some of the horrible quarterback play that has been in Buffalo since Jim Kelly, often before Jim Kelly, through Josh Allen. Just not taking this for granted, man. This guy is a special player, which, by the way, we do our fitness assessment segment at the end. 2 of the 3 are going to be Josh-related questions. Anyway, it's his birthday. He's 27 years old. Not a kid anymore, dude. He's kind of like, I don't know, around that halfway point maybe of a prime football career. But you feel me? Just kind of let's enjoy this, man. This is fun right now, getting to watch him play each and every week for your football team.
No, I'm with you. I mean, listen, it is like you go through as a sports fan. And listen, I did not grow up a fan of, of the Yankees or, I'm trying to think any of these franchises, right, that just like win.
Always win.
That's not what I've been a part of in my life. Like really in that time, right? It's like what I've seen Syracuse basketball win one national championship, which was phenomenal and fantastic. And, I don't watch sports just because my team wins a championship all the time. You go through this, and I think as both a little older, we get that part. Like, you do it. It's fun to talk to your friends about it. It's fun to kind of gather around with the family and watch the games. And yeah, it probably causes a little more heartache than it should, or a little too much exuberance than it should. But, at the end of the day, it's like, it's a lot of fun to be a Bills fan right now. And I know
Yeah.
some folks are probably listening and thinking, like, what are you talking about when when you lose to the Chiefs in the playoffs, or when this takes place, or whatever? But it's like, you're one of the most relevant franchises as far as, your performance on the field. You're getting primetime games. You're getting all these things that, a decade ago we could have only hoped for. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
we've talked before. It's like, I was excited when the Bills hired Rex Ryan, because it was almost like that desperation for attention. Well, now you get the attention because you've got one of the best quarterbacks in all of football, one of the most marketable players in all of football. And yeah, the team is good. It's fun. It should be fun.
Sure. And, we're old enough to not just remember Jim Kelly, as a young kid, but we were old enough to remember just how good he was and how big he was in this market, and with Josh Allen, that's what it is right now. He is truly one of those larger than life figures here in Buffalo. Like, I don't care where he goes. There's a lot of great former Buffalo Bills, pretty much any Buffalo Sabre, they're going to be recognized at a lot of places they go. And maybe in some situations they'll get mobbed a little bit. But Josh Allen, man, I don't care if it's Target, Chipotle, wherever this boy goes, man, he's he's the talk of the town. And it's just it's really cool to see somebody who's like larger than life like Josh Allen is, and just be a good person about it too. You know what I mean? By all accounts, a really fun-loving dude, and sneaky funny, and a hell of a quarterback, and only 27 years old. So hopefully we're gonna get to enjoy him for quite some time to come. One other thing I want to kind of jam in here real quick. We're both basketball fans. I am a big New York Knicks fan. Sucked on Sunday. Talk about a team that just had nothing left to give. That team just absolutely decimated, injury after injury after injury. And then to make matters worse, in the second half, Jalen Brunson breaks his hand, and he's done. That sucks. I hate the Celtics. I don't know. Who's your team? Do you have an NBA team? Like, who's your favorite NBA team?
Yeah, we follow the Celtics here, and that is but listen, my son is a huge Celtics fan, so it's like one of those that, for me, growing up in the NBA, it was always, okay, which guy from Syracuse is going where? So, okay, Ronnie Cycli and Sherman Douglas go to the Heat. I'm a Heat fan because those are my guys, right? Derek Coleman goes to the Nets. I'm going to follow the Nets each and every night because that's my guy. So, then growing up, it's just like, it's like, if I don't have a team myself, like, that just becomes something fun that we can follow together. I mean, I will say wholeheartedly, I was hoping for a Knicks Celtics, championship, right? Like, when you think about what it could be, it's just like, man, two fan bases that would be just completely off the chains. I mean, credit to the Pacers. They could not miss in that game yesterday. I mean, you had balls hitting the rim. It kind of goes straight up and drops in. It's like, it was just one of those days, and the way that they came out, the Knicks just did not have enough, too many injuries, too much. And that's not making excuses. Like, it was just, nobody was beating the Pacers yesterday.
No, you could tell early on. It was disappointing for me, at least. Anyway, and congratulations to the Pacers. I feel like the Knicks put them away in 5 if they're even relatively healthy. I think everybody wanted to see Knicks Celtics. I'm just not a Celtics guy. That said, Pacers ain't beating them. So your son is going to get to see the Celtics in the NBA Finals. I am looking forward to the West Finals. Minnesota, Dallas, that's going to be a lot of fun. I can't believe Denver blew a 20-point lead in Game 7 on Sunday. Just crazy. One of my most unpopular takes, and I catch the most heat for on Twitter, is and I've said this a million times, I would trade the Sabres and the Bandits tomorrow for an NBA franchise here in Buffalo. That never goes over well. By the way, wouldn't it be cool having an NBA team in Buffalo though?
Oh, of course it would. I mean, you think anywhere, and again, right, like anywhere in upstate New York, you would think to yourself, like, gosh, it could almost become like a regional team in many ways, like, like the Bills are. But it just yeah, I mean,
It wouldn't
Buffalo's
work.
a hockey town too. Like,
Yeah,
you say
it
that,
wouldn't
like,
work.
Sabre fans will come with their hockey sticks and bludgeon you for that one. So.
Yeah, it definitely would not work. I don't think the market could support a team as long if the Sabres were here. What two professional teams is as good as it's going to get here in Buffalo, which is fine. Anyway, all right, let's do the opposite of a Joe from Queens conversation right now. This is going to be a good one today. It's going to be a positive one. Joe can be, look, I love Joe, man, and I appreciate his honesty, and I kind of like having somebody with a different perspective now and then for sure. But he is not very high on this football team. That was kind of apparent on yesterday's show, led to plenty of arguments, especially when it comes to the wide receiver room. So over that. But anyway, he's got his opinions, and I respect them. Let's talk 5 guys who I think a lot of media, and I'm not even talking so much locally, but like national media, analysts, in many cases, fans are sleeping on as it pertains to the 2024 Buffalo Bills. And the guy I want to start with, and again, these are good, some of these anyway are pretty well-known names. So these aren't like no-name guys. Dawson Knox is the guy that I wanted to talk about first, okay? Because last year he was pretty terrible, but he wasn't healthy last year. He had an injury. This guy's been through a lot over the last, say, 2 years, physically, emotionally, losing his little brother. But anyway, 2023, not a good year for him at all. The Bills were kind of working on new formations, new 12 personnel stuff. They drafted tight end in the first round. Dawson Knox gets hurt, kind of falls into the background. And plus, it's a bad drops last year. Let's just call it what it is. But when he's healthy, dude, he's a really, really good tight end too on any team. He's not tight end 1 anymore in the Buffalo Bills. And, maybe he's not a top 10 tight end in the NFL, but he's one hell of a second tight end. And the Bills are going to, I would assume, use a lot of this 12 personnel. Again, you look at last year's numbers, not good at all. But you go back to 2 years before that. 2 years ago, 48 catches, 517 yards, 6 touchdowns. 2021, he had 49 catches for 587 yards and 9 touchdowns. It's a hell of a season just back in 2021. 56 of his catches were for first downs in 2021 and 2022. Pretty good drop rates those 2 years, 5.6, 6.3, and 11% drop rate last year. But anyway, I think Dawson Knox is somebody that's going to come in this season healthy and with more opportunity, more 12 personnel packages. I think he could be in line to have a really good year. I don't think people are talking about him at all right now.
Yeah, and he, of course, has a rapport with Josh Allen, right? And that is,
Sure.
There's a level of trust that those two have with each other. And you've seen that with some of those red zone opportunities for Knox. And you see him, again, being somebody that's a reliable target in the end zone. I think when you talk about people sleeping on Knox as a player, it's more just because of the contract that he has. Like hey, the Bills gave him a contract that was richer than they should have. I don't even want to say than they probably should have, based on the production, based on the player. Like, it's a richer contract than people would have liked to have seen.
Mm-hmm.
They've restructured some things, did some work with it this year to kind of make it work, help them get under the cap. So I think if people just kind of put the contract piece to the side, right, and what he's making and the impact it has on the salary cap, and just look at it and say, hey, the player that he has been in his time in Buffalo, like, listen, if he can get back and be that valuable red zone target, there's no reason anyone should sleep on him, because, you want to have this kind of bevy of pass catchers that the Bills have, and Dawson Knox is a piece of that.
He took a pay cut this year, and kind of the way the restructure worked with him, kind of committed to 2 years now. Before there was anything done with his contract, they were like, well, you're stuck with him this year contractually, and you might be able to get out of it easier after this season. The way the contract's done, he's probably a Bill for at least 2 more seasons. I don't think that's an accident. Another thing, too, that I didn't mention when I was running off all these pro Dawson Knox numbers, the guy's been pretty solid in the playoffs. And I am on the hunt for guys who step up in the playoffs. That's probably the origin of my big argument yesterday with Joe on this show. I care what guys do in the regular season. It matters because you got to get to the playoffs. But give me guys who play better in the playoffs than they do in the regular season. And Dawson Knox seems to be one of those guys. One of Josh Allen's favorites. He's got, I think, like 10 touchdowns or 6 touchdowns in 10 playoff games, 6 in his last 9 playoff games, actually. So, he is a good red zone target. Do you feel like he's in line for a bigger role than a lot of people think this year in this year's offense, the way things seem to be structured, where there's not going to be a Stefon Diggs type alpha wide receiver one in that room, in that offense? It's going to be kind of a committee week by week thing. Kind of feels like Dawson Knox is one of those guys who's going to be in line for a role maybe more similar to 2 or 3 years ago as opposed to last year.
That's hard for me to predict, right? Because there's just so many new pieces where it's just like every time I look at it, it's how many targets is everyone going to get? And then it feels like a little bit of, okay, I'm just sort of making up these numbers because all of these guys are new to the equation, right? At least when you think of the wide receivers. But when you say that, I think it's even a little bit less about, hey, is he going to get, 50 receptions and close to 600 yards, or more just about that part of, again, be valuable in pass protection, be kind of shorthanded when necessary. You see him being a guy and, call it like 3rd and medium, right? 3rd and 6 yards, 3rd and 5, like Dawson Knox can be a guy that definitely can rely on and be that, effective player in the red zone. And maybe that's only like 4 or 5 touchdowns on the season. But again, when you talk about the number of weapons that they have, and I think fans, myself included, like I got to stop looking at the guy in the terms of like fantasy football and just look at the impact that he has on the team. And I think that's with so many players, right? You play fantasy football, you want a guy to be, in your starting lineup or whatever it is. And it's just, okay, he's not going to be that guy unless Dalton Kincaid gets hurt. And even then it's probably a little questionable and TD dependent, but like for the football player that he is and the success of the offense, yeah, he'll be a critical piece.
That is a fantastic point, by the way. We're talking about fantasy football because, if you got him on your fantasy team, you're going to be frustrated a lot more weeks than you won't. I kind of liken what I expect from him, what I think he might give the Bills, kind of like what I do to an extent with MVS. And I know that's kind of a real projection because MVS hasn't even had a practice with the Buffalo Bills yet. You kind of know what Dawson Knox, for the most part, is or what he can be. And what I mean by that is this. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, I don't think he's going to join the Bills this year. I don't think he's going to have a lot of 6 catches for 110 yards and a touchdown. But I think there's going to be moments. There's going to be big plays. And when he makes a play, it's going to matter. I kind of feel like that would be what Dawson Knox does. I agree with you. I think in this offense, especially with Dalton Kincaid, as long as he's healthy, the days of Dawson Knox having 49 catches for 587 yards are done. But that doesn't mean that he can't be a very useful part of this offense. And when he makes catches, in the red zone, catches that matter. So, yeah, I think some people are sleeping on him. And I think he's one of those guys who could have a really good year. Another guy, we'll go to the other side of the football here before we take a break. Look, again, another player that people know pretty well, but when you talk defensive end, you think of Von Miller and you think of other stars on this team, period. I've been pretty high on it since they re-signed him, AJ Epinesa. And I look at his numbers and I kind of dove in a little bit. So he's had 6.5 sacks each of his last 2 seasons. But then you go and you look at the snap count. And he only played 41% of the snaps last season and 40% 2 years ago. He's only played 50% of the snaps in a football game, 6 of his last 51 games. And he only had 1 game last year where he played more than 30 snaps, which was in London against Jacksonville. And in that game, he's one of the few guys who showed up because he had 2 sacks and a forced fumble. This is a guy that, with limited opportunity, has produced pretty well when healthy. Now, again, like so many other Bills, he got hurt last year and really slowed down at the end of the year. But you're looking at a team, they moved on from Leonard Floyd, didn't really make a big splashy free agent acquisition at defensive end, didn't draft a defensive end in the 5th round. Seems to me like this is a guy who's going to get more than 40% of the snaps this year. This is a guy who's probably going to get 55 to 60%. And if he can stay healthy over a full season, playing more snaps based on what he's done with the time he's had on the field, I look at AJ Epinesa and I'm like, yo, this is a guy at the end of the year, he could have 10, 11 sacks and be a big part of this defense.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I mean, you remember from our conversations earlier, I mean, this was a guy, when you talked about re-signings in free agency, that I was prioritizing really over anybody else that the team had as a free agent, because you look at the production, you look at the snap counts, and I realize it can be easy to cherry pick certain games, but it's just like, listen, when he's in a scenario where he is on the field, you can look at it 2 seasons ago to week 1 against the Rams in the NFL season kickoff. He was a terror in that game.
Sure.
Right? Like, this is a guy that is active. Okay, maybe not as good against the run as others. So I don't want to sit here and say, like, listen, let him play 70% of the snaps and, like, let him go. Like, for what you're paying him, for what you have, like, see if he can do it. See if he can be that player. He's young enough. He's played limited enough in the first 4, years of his career. And I think with Epinesa, and similar to a fact like with Dawson Knox, like, I think the expectations have started to set in a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like, okay, yeah, this was your, the first selection you made in the draft that year because your first round pick turned into Stefon Diggs, and people were expecting more. Here's a guy that was expected to be a first round pick. He was not, inactive early in his career, and it just, like, people sort of soured on him a little bit too early. Now I feel like that's kind of building back up as you see, like, okay, this is a guy that, can really deliver, earn the contract that he got, relatively modest, a 2-year deal coming back to Buffalo. I really like this list that you have and the fact that you had Epinesa on it. So
yeah, and by the way, I mean, he set the tone in that Chiefs game last year with the Bills. Won defensively, got an interception, got hurt on the play, hurt his ribs on it. But yeah, he's kind of a big play machine who disappears for stretches too. And that's kind of like the downside of him. But again, I just feel like the opportunity is going to be this year. I feel like he's going to have a bigger opportunity than he's had any year in the past. We're going to stick with the defensive side of the football. Actually, that same position too. Take a real quick break. Plenty more coming up with Anthony Marino. All right, I am back here with Anthony Marino, and we're going over a handful of players that I feel like, to some extent at least, a lot of people out there are sleeping on. You talk about star players on this team, and obviously Josh Allen heads that list. Von Miller, whatever he's got left, he's still a star. Teron Johnson has kind of become a star. Matt Milano, definitely a star. Greg Rousseau is a guy right now that I feel like no one talks about him like he's a star, and he's not really a star, but I feel like he's teetering on that. And again, with so many, it sounds like a broken record, Anthony, but health. Like, this guy hasn't been healthy for 17 games pretty much since he's came into the league. He hasn't missed a lot of games, but he's played through a lot of shit, man. And you go and you look at the PFF numbers from last year. He had an 87.1 PFF overall grade, which was 13th best in the entire NFL among defensive edge rushers. Just a 15.2% missed tackle percentage. He had a team high 31 run stops last year. But again, the sacks really haven't been there. Just 5 last year. And he was bothered by a toe for a lot of the year. He had 8 sacks in 2022, despite being bothered by an ankle. So kind of like bad injury luck has slowed him down. I just feel like this, and he's a first-round pick. So to call somebody a sleeper on this team who's a first-round pick who just got his 5th-year option exercise, maybe calling him a sleeper is a stretch, but I kind of don't feel like it is because, again, I really don't think when people talk about the Bills' defense, they're bringing him up as one of the first couple guys, and they should, because I think he's far and away the most talented player among that group for sure.
Well, and defensive end is a position that most have kind of written off, right? I mean, you look at it, they didn't do much in the draft, right? You invest a 5th-round pick. Talk about what they've done in free agency, some modest moves to this point. But, you look at it and you say with Rousseau, like, okay, is it just the injuries? Is it the consistency? Like, let's see. I mean, I'm certainly a fan of his, kind of the player when you see those flashes. And yeah, to your point, like, I mean, it doesn't even have to be a 17 game season. Just it seems that these injuries that he has, the comeback from them becomes that much more difficult, right? Like he gets off to a good start, has these great stretches, and then, trying to come back from the injury, there's just not that full recovery, I guess, that you would be looking for. So I am certainly hopeful. Again, when you talk about him and Epinesa, I mean, what these guys can be over the next 2 years, my hope is that just like, yeah, they can be those bookend defensive ends that you can, Wright and Sharpie as your starters. And then regardless of what happens with Von Miller, if you develop somebody else or you get kind of a mid-tier free agent, that's fine. But for these to be your main two guys, and he certainly has the potential. He's flashed enough. God, you just look at him out on the field, like just his kind of his size, right? His wingspan, what he can be to kind of disrupt things. Because I try not to put just too much emphasis on sacks, right? I think when you talk about defensive ends, it's like 10 sacks is this major milestone. If you get 10 sacks, it's a successful season. Oh, we only got 8. Like it's
Right.
not like, well, there's a lot of other things that a player can do. So I'm trying not to put too much emphasis just on that one statistic.
He's so good at setting the edge to a borderline elite run defender. And look, he's going into year 4. It doesn't mean he's not ascending. Players are still ascending in certain situations in year 4. And I kind of feel like he's the guy. What do you think? And I agree with you, by the way. It's not just about sacks. That said, what do you think the ceiling for a healthy 17 game, relatively healthy Greg Rizzo is? Like, where do you see like the most? Is it like 10 sacks, 10 to 12 sacks? Does that kind of feel like that's like the ceiling for a guy like Greg Rizzo over the course of a full year, which would be great?
I mean, listen, I would say the ceiling can even be more than that. But like, let's be honest, like based on the injury history, based on the rotation they have, like, yeah, 12 probably sounds about right. And I just was pulling this up too. I mean, Rousseau just turned 24 years old back in April. So like still a baby when it comes to kind of being a defensive end and so early in his professional career.
I feel like he's got potential to be like the team's quote unquote like breakout star, like a guy that people all around the league know about by the end of the year who really didn't know about it. Yeah, it's easy to say Dalton Kincaid, but I think people already know plenty about Dalton Kincaid. But I kind of lean towards Rizzo as that type of player. Another player that I like an awful lot that I think flies under the radar, maybe not so much in Buffalo, but absolutely around the league, is the corner, Christian Benford. Stats ain't going to blow you away. He had 2 interceptions last year, 2 forced fumbles. That's stats really don't tell the story. At least, let me take that back. Interceptions don't really tell the story with Christian Benford. Analytics, advanced stats, I kind of feel like do. Again, going to PFF, which I say this all the time, I kind of run with PFF, and I know some people don't really care for their stats. Some of them could be off, but you don't get to pick and choose which PFF stats are good and which ones are bad. You kind of got to roll with them. So if you want to say Greg Rizzo is one of the better defensive ends, well, Tyrell Dodson was one of the better linebackers in the NFL last year if you look at PFF. But anyway, his overall grade with PFF last year, 83, which was 9th best in the NFL among all corners. 83.3 coverage grade from PFF, which was 7th best among all corners. And then on a team that, quite frankly, doesn't tackle very well at times, Christian Benford had an 83.7 tackle grade, which was 6th best in the NFL among all corners. So grade-wise, performance-wise, don't seem like it to a lot of people, but performance-wise, this was a top 10 corner in the NFL. And he hurt his knee, kept him out of the Kansas City game, and that was freaking huge, man. Rasul Douglas is the big name in Buffalo right now in terms of corner, but Christian Benford might actually be the best corner. And even if he's not, to me, this is a guy who's hugely underrated, a big sleeper guy for the Bills.
Yeah, and I think this will be, when I say a critical year, like that's too strong of a term, right? But like going into year 3, right, on a
Mhm.
4-year contract. I mean, even back to his rookie season, more of the conversation was around Kyer Elam, right? And those two had that
Sure.
whatever platoon going on early that was taking place. Of course, we've seen the Bills be able to have almost anyone play cornerback and
Mhm.
have a level of success under, Sean McDermott's system. Now no more Jordan Poyer, potentially no more Micah Hyde, right? You just say to yourself, like, okay, did those safeties, did they help make life easier for the cornerbacks where, you could have a Levi Wallace, a Dane Jackson out there having success? Or is it going to be a scenario where no, Christian Benford is just that good and, regardless of who's playing safety and what's going on. But, last year, really that first full season for him, like I said, the narrative is gone away from Kyer Elam and more of the conversation around him. This will be the year for like Christian Benford again. Like, okay, you're locked in as the starter. Let's see this continue. And probably a big year for him is, the Bills can look at him as someone at the end of this season as a candidate for a pretty nice contract extension.
Do you know what's pretty wild? So this is 4. There's still got one more player left, but we've talked about 4 players. All 4 battled injuries last year. Again, I just can't get over how snake bitten this team has been over the last couple of years. And I'll tell you what, imagine what the Bills cornerback situation would be if it were not for the emergence of Christian Benford. Like if you were trying to fit Kyer Elam in there as a starter and he's just not starter quality, the resources that the Bills would have had to do to kind of address that position this year, whether it would have been big money in free agency that then they don't get to do something else, or they have to use a first round pick or at worst a second round pick on a corner, which kind of takes away from something else they do. I really like Christian Benford a lot. I mean, and he's got that low key kind of star potential. I just God, I like this guy. What a great 6th-round pick, too. That's the part that I really like the most. He's 6th-round pick, and Kyer Elam has so far been a disappointment. But you look at that draft, and even if you write off Kyer Elam as a bust, and you do that right now, which you shouldn't, but if you do, it's still a hell of a draft that
Well, and it's
2022.
funny, I have got to catch myself sometimes with it. And it was even in the comments a couple weeks back about the draft, and I had the line saying like, gosh, my happiness with a draft really shouldn't be, oh, did the Bills take another wide receiver in the 5th round? But you know what? And one of the followers like kind of called me out and said, well, listen, the last 2 wide receivers that they took, right, that have played, Khalil Shakir was a 5th-round pick. Gabe Davis was a 4th-round pick. So,
Sure.
There's enough there to be able to say like, yeah, that should matter. And someone like Christian Benford. And sometimes I'll find myself being like, oh, whatever with, just trade this pick away or just use it to trade up or whatever it is type of thing. But when you got enough hits in the 5th and 6th round that work out okay, Christian Benford's a perfect example.
Absolutely. Quick left little detour before we get to the last guy, because you mentioned him. I want to ask you, I know you've been on Twitter over the weekend, about the Micah Hyde charity softball game. Kind of get a sense listening to this dude that, I don't know, man. I don't think I'm not sure he's done anymore. I thought for sure he was going to retire. Then I was like, flip a coin. Maybe it's 50-50. I kind of got a gut feeling right now, the way he talks, that there's above 50% chance that he's going to sign with the Bills again.
Yeah, it's funny, I think like everyone, you expected, oh, he's going to wait to announce his retirement at the softball game, right? That'll be his next public appearance. Totally get it. Well, that's not the case because he was doing plenty of media leading up to it, right? We talked about his appearance with Eric Wood. He was on WGR, again, addressing it at the game, and you try to like connect all these dots. Is it a little bit of, is he thinking about coming back? I mean, it sounds like the Bills want him back. I mean, if he's saying like, listen, I, talked to McDermott and Bean the other day. I think he had mentioned that on WGR on with Shope and the Bulldog last week of just like, okay, they're staying in contact. Like that's tough though, right? I mean, you've got to think about it and credit Zach Sheldon from from Trainwreck Sports, right? His question, he was saying like, some of your critics are saying you've got a senioritis out there. You know what I mean? It's a little, well, I don't want to go to OTAs or training camp or this and that. And, Zach was having some fun with him, but Micah, gave a serious response and just like, he's just not sure what he wants to do.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, if you're not sure, it could go a couple of different ways, right? Like you're either leaving the door half open or you're leaving it half closed. And it sounds like the way he's talking, he wants to leave it half open and just but he wants to feel good physically, with what he's deciding to do. So that's going to be really interesting, especially with the moves they've made at safety this offseason. Because I don't think he comes back to just be a bench player, being active on game days. Like that's not what he's looking to do.
I always maybe I overanalyze everything. I'm always trying to feel like I'm solving a puzzle, reading between the lines. And I mean, he made a point, even the wording, usually this tournament's for current players because he was talking about Jordan Poyer being on the other team. And he goes, I'm technically not even playing for the Buffalo Bills right now. I think Josh Allen is more privy to his plans than you and I are. And he's leading a charge of, or chant of one more year to the crowd on Sunday. Mike Edwards is a good safety, but just like with the Chiefs and just like with the Rams before that, he wasn't actually the starter. He's played plenty and he's capable of starting. I'm sure Mike Edwards wouldn't be all that pleased if Micah Hyde comes back, but I feel like if Micah Hyde came back, Hyde's the starter, Mike Edwards would be there. I don't know. We'll have another conversation another time about what Micah Hyde physically on the football field might actually have left because he wasn't great last year. Anyway, but that'll be another conversation for another time. I just think it's really interesting because for months, most people, including myself, wrote off Micah Hyde and lumped him into the Poyer, the Trey White, the Stefon Diggs category. And now I feel like maybe we're a little premature with that. Anyway, last player that I got on this list, and again, I got many more too, is James Cook. And as you're like, what? James Cook, a sleeper. People know James Cook. I get that. I just feel like this guy, and maybe just the NFL is a lot different now. It's such a more passing league, but he is one of the least celebrated, talked about guys who finished fourth in the NFL in rushing that I've ever seen. Fourth in the NFL in rushing, seventh in scrimmage yards. He averaged 4.7 yards per carry last year. Also had 44 catches for 445 yards and 4 touchdowns in the passing game. Some badass drops. But anyway, dude had 1,567 yards from scrimmage. Very Thurman Thomas-y to me. And Thurman walked around here like King of Buffalo, one of the kings of Buffalo, and was treated as such. And on this team, like James Cook's probably now even one of the most 5 or 6, 7 talked about guys on this roster right now, man. This is a good football player, one who I think still has plenty of room to grow. He's been a little mistake prone, especially with the drops at least. But man, it's why don't more people around the league talk about James Cook? Guy was fourth in the NFL in rushing. Ain't nobody talking about James Cook.
Yeah, but I think when you talk about the running back position, and listen, we always joke around about it, about the draft and different pieces, big names in free agency. Like, it's a different position now. It is looked at differently. And that is to this point, right? Because you would think like, oh, no, wait, it's only because we don't have a Saquon Barkley or a Derrick Henry. I'm not saying James Cook is in that stratosphere, right? The position is not revered as it was in the days of Thurman Thomas, even in the days of Adrian Peterson. Like, it is different. And I think a piece that shows that is the Bills using a 4th round pick on Ray Davis, right? Because you can argue a 4th rounder, not to say like, oh, it's marquee, draft capital, but that is a lock to make your roster, right? If they do something in the 5th round or 6th round, you could be like, well, who knows? Maybe that's someone you can sneak onto a practice squad. Like, no, they made an investment in someone that will be active on game day and was kind of filling that role that Latavius Murray had, and we saw him produce. So listen, you've got to hedge with it, right? If somebody is injured, you don't want to be sitting there and picking guys up off the street, or you don't want to leave yourself in a position that once James Cook, 2 years left on his rookie deal. But it is interesting because, again, like, it just ties in from that media. When I say narrative, I don't mean that like in a negative way, just of what you're going to talk about. And like, sometimes it's like, yeah, you've got a good running back, but that doesn't lead the conversation like the wide receiver conversation does.
It just, if you go back to last year, now he tore Dallas up, but you look at his season, they feel like you were watching a guy who was fourth in the NFL in rushing. It didn't seem that way. Like, it wasn't one of those spectacular type of campaigns. Seventh in the whole league in scrimmage yards. It just feels like it was almost like quietly done.
Well, and I think when you talk about even the rushing piece, I mean, sometimes it's just like you can just consistently be decent and be 1,000-yard rusher. And that's not like being consistent. Like, that's a big deal. And we've seen flashes from James Cook. I mean, I think the only thing that holds him back right now is just some of those untimely bad drops that he's that is a piece when you look at it just as a pass catching back. He's able to make a couple more of those plays. And that's a big difference of just like, I think, some of that cloud of negativity where people might sleep on him, to steal your term.
Sure. And look, I get it too. There's a lot of people out there probably watching or listening and saying, what's James Cook a sleeper? He's going to be a first round pick in fantasy football, probably in a lot of leagues. Certainly a first or second round pick, for sure. I don't know. It's just, to me, I look at this offense and what they're going to be, and we don't know that for sure. I just feel like he's going to have a big role, and especially if he can, eliminate those untimely drops, like you talked about. This guy could be a star. I don't know. I feel like he's being slept on at least a little bit. But anyway, yeah. So that's my 5. There's plenty more. Khalil Shakir, I could do a whole show on him.
I gotta add a guy to the list, though. I'm surprised.
Absolutely.
I'm surprised. And everybody knows we both participated in Joe Marino's activity where he had a dozen different content creators kind of tie you
which
in.
is out now. Go check that out on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from. Joe Marino, top 10 critical Bills or critical to the future, I should say, Buffalo Bills. An excellent 12 person panel that did include Anthony and myself. Go ahead. What do you got?
But one of the guys that panel slept on, and I think a lot of people do too, is Spencer Brown. And I think Spencer Brown is the starting right tackle. Again, right, gets kind of rushed into the starting lineup as a rookie as they start shifting some things around with Darrell Williams and benching John Feliciano. And, Brown gets thrown in there a little bit sooner than he should. Like, you always hear about him having some sort of an offseason procedure, whatever that may be. But it's just like, okay, for the transition that he's made, for the way that he played in 2023, like, no one is talking about him, in my opinion, in the light of just like, no, this should be your starting right tackle that should be getting a contract extension before the start of the season, because you can probably get him for $10 or $11 million a year now. That if he has a year in 2024 like he did in 2023, you're talking $15 million or north of that. And I think just and listen, I don't want to make this sound like because someone has a great relationship with Josh Allen, that means that it should be someone that is, should get a contract extension. We talked about Dawson Knox before and his relationship. That's not it. But when you're talking about someone this young in this stage in his career and the way that he's playing and that trajectory still going up, that yes, there is that inherent level of trust between your right tackle and your starting quarterback. To me, that is a guy that people are not talking about, that I wouldn't be shocked if he gets a contract extension sometime during training camp. We've seen other guys. Dawson Knox was one of them. Tre'Davious White, Josh Allen got his, contract extension kind of in that August to early September before week 1 time period. I would not be surprised if he signs some sort of an extension, because we know that the Bills have this space in the future. And I would guess that's someone that they would prioritize.
Great selection. And you know what? Were it not for the almost like out of nowhere shocking emergence for many people, at least of Terrell Bernard, you can make a really reasonable case that Spencer Brown might have been the most pleasant surprise on the Buffalo Bills in 2023. Really stepped his game up. And again, like with so many of these other guys we've talked about, health was a factor when he did not play well in 2022. He was healthier in 2023, and it showed on football field. That's a great choice. All right, let's get to our Fitness and Census segment here with the last few minutes that we have. 3 questions, same deal as always, just an opportunity for people out there who are consuming the show to get a little bit of insight on what we're thinking beyond just the Bills or Sabres talk that we always have on these shows. This came to me because I was watching something for like a gazillionth time late Friday night. The musical Annie launched today in 1982. And I know a lot of people are like, who the hell is Annie? I know a lot of younger people don't even know what the hell Annie even is, but it is a famous musical. Anyway, it launched on this date in 1982, which is what, 42 years ago. Holy shit, that was a long time ago. Anyway, your favorite musical is blank.
Hamilton.
Okay.
And it's easy, it's easy to say that, and it's not even just recency bias. I mean, I've probably seen like 10 different shows live, right? My daughter's a performer. She loves that piece. It's just one of those that like you realize there is a level of talent out there which just can blow you away, right? When you look at these productions. Hamilton is unlike anything I've ever seen before in my life. And I remember even going to that show, like, okay, I get that there's all this hype around it. I didn't really know much of what I was going to. And sitting in the audience that day, and I remember just the level of talent, the ability to take something and the culture of hip hop and so much 90s hip hop and hearing the influence of Notorious B.I.G. and others, right? It just like to bring that into that setting around a historical, talking about the history of our country. I was just blown away. And at the end of that show, I will say this, and my family always makes fun of me because I'm an emotional guy. Sometimes when you watch a show or a movie, even if it's something that you've seen before, but just like we're there giving a standing ovation, and I've got like tears in my eyes of just like,
yeah,
that was quite possibly the most incredible performance I've ever seen. And it just, so for me, that was an easy choice.
That's awesome. Mine, it's almost more of a movie than a musical. It's Grease, though. And that's what I was watching on late Friday night that I had to bring it up. I feel like I say this every opportunity I get when I bring in Grease, because Grease very well might be my favorite movie of all times. It's an old ass movie. I was a very, very young kid when it came out, but from the time I was a young kid until Friday night, I watch it every opportunity I get. I might be able to say nearly word for word the entire dialogue of that movie. There's so many catchphrases and quips and lines from that movie that I still use to this day. The music was unrivaled for that era I'm talking about, at least anyway. Bobby Rydell High, just unbelievable. I love John Travolta during that time. And Olivia Newton-John is, God rest her soul, man, my first crush. If I had a wider pan of my studio, I got a big Olivia Newton-John album cover right off here to my right. I absolutely love her. I love that musical. And it's kind of like a gap. Like there's a tier, and that's, for me, is on its own. And then there's a bunch of them in tier 2. So yeah, I got to go Grease. And I'm sure I've been asked this a lot, or bring up Grease a lot on the show, but I'm never going to not say Grease when it comes to a musical and maybe a movie at all. By the way, real quick, I mean, I'm talking it up. Did you like Grease? I'm sure you've watched Grease at some point in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it. I remember watching it when I was young. I couldn't tell you the last time I watched it again. Maybe when, the kids were younger one night. But so yeah,
you weren't trying to be in the T-Birds, though, right?
No, I was not. Yeah, I wasn't. Looking to grease my hair or anything like that.
All right. So again, Josh Allen's birthday today, Tuesday, I should say, at least anyway. And this is tough, man. This is tough. I had to think on this too. Your singularly favorite Josh Allen moment so far is blank.
Thanksgiving Day against Dallas,
Mm.
the fourth down conversion. And really, I mean, you can say that whole game, right? Because I think you go into it and it's one of those first, okay, Bills playing on Thanksgiving Day. Can you beat the Cowboys? Like, that was the coming out party. And that play became the one that all of a sudden it's like, oh, NFL Network has a promo for the upcoming season. There's that play, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fox is doing a promo for, the upcoming season. There's that play. Like, it became
Sure.
the one that they would show. And I know some people might say, well, when he hurdled Anthony Barr with the Vikings in this part, but to me, that was just like, okay, this team can be something. And I know some might be like, well, the Cowboys are always kind of overrated or this and that. But you beat the Cowboys on Thanksgiving Day, right? I mean, that's the most watched game of the year outside of the Super Bowl.
Sure. Yeah.
So to do it on that stage, to me, that was really awesome. That was a great day.
It was kind of like his national arrival. Like, he has
Yes.
arrived here. All right, for me, real quick, look, nothing will ever be more devastating than wide right, because literally that's a kick to win the Super Bowl. That's it. The kick goes through, the game's over, the Buffalo Bills are Super Bowl champions. That will always be the most devastating for me. Second is 13 seconds. And what sucks about that, like with the Super Bowl, even if Scott Norwood makes the kick and the Bills are Super Bowl champions, if you look back at that game and reflect on the game, it wasn't a thrilling, exciting game. But who gives a shit, because the Bills would have been Super Bowl champions. The saddest part about 13 seconds, besides the fact I think the Bills go to Super Bowl and that they lost that game, the second saddest part is it took away from one of the best last 5 minutes of a football game in the history of the NFL. If you're not looking at it as a Bills fan and devastated that they lost in 13 seconds, you're watching this game unbiased, objectively, this might be the best fourth quarter you've ever seen in your life. Two teams playing football. And for me, being caught up in that moment, the Bills taking the lead, Kansas City, Tyreek Hill going 75 yards, you got a minute left, kick into the end zone, 75-yard drive, and with a minute 2 left on the clock. And the throw that Josh Allen made, stepped up into the pocket, it was like a 19-yard pass or something like that. Gabe Davis in between two guys to give the Bills that 36-33 lead with 13 seconds left was just absolute euphoria. And I kept waiting because, the Bills, the history of the franchise, you find a way to lose. Your quarterback finds a way to make a bad throw. Ronnie Harmon in the end, then the interception in the next play. All these years, Josh never did that. Play after play after play after play after play in the fourth quarter when he had to make it. And then the final one of the game for the Bills offensively is a dart between two defenders to Gabe Davis for the touchdown. Best play, I guess that would be it. It wasn't his best play, but it was my favorite one singularly because of the impact, it should have had on the final score. Just unbelievable performance from Josh Allen down the stretch.
So you bring up 13 seconds, wide right, and Ronnie Harmon all in this conversation. You're just like, my heart and soul hurts this morning. But, I totally get what you're saying.
All right, we got 2 minutes left here. All right, one more. We'll kind of stick with Josh a little bit. Josh's 27 years old right now, all right? You and I are not 27 years old. We're significantly older. A piece of advice you wish you could give to your 27-year-old self right now is blank.
Gosh, I mean, there's so many different things you could say, right? Like the running joke, like buy Apple stock, or something like that. But I mean, in reality, I think it would probably be more of that advice of take care of yourself physically now, as opposed to waiting. I mean, when you're in your 20s, you eat whatever, drink whatever, you think
Sure.
you can bounce back a heck of a lot easier. And then as you grow up, that kind of catches up with you a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk about working out, being a little bit more healthy, that probably would have been the advice I would have given myself at 27, because you kind of take that for granted back then.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so much. There's so many other things you could say. I'm trying not to be too serious here or anything along those lines.
Yeah, no, look, dude, I wish you would have gave me my 27-year-old self that advice when I was chain smoking a pack of half a cigarette a day. I haven't had a cigarette in 14, 12, 13 years, something like that. But the damage was done, man. I'm 40 years old and already got diagnosed with COPD. So yeah, man, health-wise, take better care of yourself. Perfect advice. Real quick, mine is this, man. Just allow yourself to be a little more happier. You know, don't get content. You know, that's my thing too, especially when I was younger. Always push to get better. I always push to get better. Like I'd get in a good situation, things would be good at home, the kid would be good. Listen, I would just get content. I would stop pushing to try to better myself all the time. You know what I mean? I would just spend a lot of my 30s, even in my 40s, quite frankly, just too content with the way things are instead of pushing to be better. You know, and any way you want, physically, emotionally, mentally, just successful in life, family, all that stuff. Just get a little bit too content. I think I was for a lot of my life. Anyway, it's an therapy here at the end with Patrick and Anthony. But on a serious note, man, I do appreciate you. I know you got a meeting you got to get to, got some things to get done as well. This was a good show, good conversation. Make sure you follow Anthony on Twitter at Anth Marino, and go check out Locked On Bills today and tomorrow. Actually, Joe Marino 2-part series that Anthony and I are both a part of. Thanks, bud. Always good having you on, man.
Always a pleasure, Pat.
All right, guys, I'll be back with a brand new show, Pod Bag, coming up tomorrow. Talk to you then.